Peace everyone, Assalamu alaikum. Thank you all for being here. Actually, I want to begin with a better thank you than that, actually, because this is the last of our three events this week. And so I want to begin first really by thanking our hosts here in the university. So thank you to all, to the ISOC here for hosting us. Please give also, I want to thank our Irish hosts, the man of many names who stepped out, I guess, for a moment, but Owen, Yahya, Abu Mujahid, Wayman, whatever you want to call him. We call him all of those things, leprechaun, whatever it is. I want to thank him, of course, for being a huge organizer, bringing us all here, connecting us. I want to thank Nadia and Cage and Horace and Zulaika from the Feed Near Farouk campaign. Carrie also from Cage as well. Thank you all for coming over, someone from England. And to Dermot and Joanne, also from the campaigns here. Ian, for all your support this week. Really, I can't forget Stockford as well, for who's been managing as well. All of everyone who's come together to bring this tour together. It's really, it's been very meaningful for me. It seemed very meaningful for our audiences. It's been such a real opportunity to connect, and so I want to thank you all for that. I also wanted to thank Santino, who's been filming and producing content. So that way, no matter how large or small the audience, it keeps on growing by capturing these moments, by sharing this with the world. These videos are already being shared back home in New York, and so I know that people are getting excited that we're finally connecting some of the dots here which need to be connected, that we're learning from people who've been doing this for 800 years, literally. We're fighting the same enemy that we have, and that we're finally really building a real solidarity, of course. While the cultural solidarity should have always been there, and it has been there, and it's been demonstrated time and time again, really now to actually be here in person, to actually really build relationships, build friendships, is really an important moment, which I don't want to take for granted. So I just want to thank you all for allowing me to be a part of this as well. And so to that, I applaud you. So the benefit of having Santino film all of these events is that we can kind of stretch out our topics a little bit. We can discuss different pieces of a very large puzzle. On Wednesday, I spoke about the importance of a shared history. I'm sorry, I hate suits. We talked about the importance of a shared history, shared cultural resistance, and just the mission that we have here this week in connecting these dots. Yesterday I spoke at some length, admittedly, about some of the long history and the context of imperialism, of imperial order, the logic that underlies this so-called war on terror today. And so today I'm going to focus more specifically. I'm going to focus more specifically on a number of cases, as my colleagues have also, that took place in the United States of America. Cases which, in my opinion, were instrumental in lowering the bar of what it takes to put a human being in a box for the rest of their lives. These cases they're emotional. I'm not going to go into such the detail because these are either friends or friends of friends. But I'm going to do my best to share what is most relevant in explaining how grotesque really these miscarriages of justice are. And all in all, I'll try to keep it brief because I think I'm the last one holding this from a Q&A session, which I hope will also be robust. And I look forward to the discussion with all of you afterwards. The first one I wanted to mention was one that occurred early, actually, after the declaration of this war on terror, after 9/11. I believe it was in 2004, or around about that. The Holy Land Foundation, leaders of the Holy Land Foundation, an international charity, were charged. They were declared a terrorist organization actually soon after in 2001. But in 2004, they were charged, 5 men were charged, finally convicted of material support for terrorism. Now this material support law, you reminded me of it, Dermot, with some of the cases going back some decades. It's one of those laws, it's the gift that keeps on giving for the government. Really, it's such an ugly one that the definition of which keeps on expanding. And the purpose of focusing today on the cases, on the judicial cases, rather than just the laws themselves, because even as bad as the laws look on paper, the way that the precedents are set is what continues to expand and continues to suck in more people into this prison system. The Holy Land Foundation was, as I said, an international charity, very mainstream. This wasn't a marginal charity, this wasn't some secret operation, this wasn't some underground type of movement. This was an organization which many Muslims in America donated to before 9/11. The money was used domestically as well as overseas. And what was the most controversial and what finally brought the case along was their focus on Palestine. The logic of the government, and this isn't conspiracy theory that I'm putting in my own words, the logic of the government in this case was that because the Holy Land Foundation was collecting zakat, was collecting charity, and distributing it in Palestine through local zakat committees, in West Bank specifically. And because these zakat committees were allegedly controlled by the Hamas movement in these regions, and because if they didn't give this money through these committees, then Hamas themselves, as a so-called terrorist organization, would have to then come out of their own pockets to provide charity for the orphanages that were specifically being supported there. Therefore, this American-based charity is providing material support for a terrorist organization. It's deep, right? And this was an early one. This was one it was a huge case. It was a way that the government actually sucked in almost every major Muslim organization into the case. They didn't end up convicting other groups, but by tagging them with the label of being tied to this trial of this great terrorism funding organization, they threw a big number on it, like $12 million or something, was sent to Hamas. It's been a war really for American Muslim groups just to detach themselves from this case, because unfortunately they're not eager to even get down to the logic of this case either, for fear of being sucked in further. This case this was one of the early material support cases. Although the material support law dates back to the 90s, this was one of those cases which really just lowered the bar much further, and actually leads me right into the second case, which I wanted to discuss further. Although I should mention that the 5 men who were convicted finally in this case are all serving sentences between 15 and 65 years in prison. 65 years in prison for giving charity, for collecting and distributing charity to orphans, like to children, to feeding children in a land which is occupied. It's such a crime that these men, and these are not young men either, have been taken away from their families, from their children and grandchildren. And I've been blessed to work over the last few years with some of their families. These are beautiful people, beautiful families that continue to fight. They still have hope, they still have optimism to free their parents, as they should, as they absolutely should. And we pray every day, every moment, that we pray that Allah frees them, that we are able to be part of that movement to free them, and that we'll be successful in that. Ameen. I'll skip ahead to the second one. And this is our brother Clark Mahana. This case was always, I think, especially disturbing to me. I was already conscious of these cases and working directly on some of these cases. The case of Brother Tariq, I don't know, it's something about it, just maybe it's because we kind of look similar, maybe it's because he's not that much older than us also. His brother was not marginal, he was not a marginal member of the community. He was a pharmacist, a professional, a community leader, one very much engaged in interfaith dialogue, someone who was building relationships, with people of other faiths in the Boston area. This was someone who was a committed Muslim, someone who learned and taught, someone who used his skills with language to translate texts going back centuries. This was someone who was very active and did so on his own time, as a volunteer. And as the story goes, this is not denied by the government, he was approached in the parking lot of his workplace and asked by, I believe they were FBI agents. They asked him to be an informant, basically on his own community. And not only did he have nothing to say, but that I would tell you anyway, basically. And they said that we can either do this the easy way or the hard way. Which is, as he said later, this is when he knew. And he told him, try this your hard way, I suppose. And that's exactly what they did. They strung together a case which pulled together a trip that he had taken to Yemen in 2004, I think it was, tied to translation work that he had done and they had posted for free online. The government never bothered proving that, or even arguing, that the translations that he had done were in coordination with some terrorist group, that they were, at the behest of some terrorist group, which is supposedly the required to prove that there was material support for a terrorist organization, that there was some collusion with this group to do so. They never even bothered to argue this, really. They just said that basically his beliefs were in line. That his beliefs were in line with terrorist organizations, and by terrorist organizations what they meant were people who were resisting the American occupation of Iraq and the American occupation, invasion and occupation of Afghanistan. And he was clear about this. In his trial this came up, much time was spent in his trial of what his beliefs were, of what his political opinions were. And of course he agreed, as all of us should, from a human rights perspective, that people attacked, that people invaded have the right to defend themselves, clearly. This is why we're here.
It's even in the United Nations. It's even quoted in the United Nations.
It's very simple. And we know who runs the United Nations, of course, and so this is a difficult cases to take through those halls in New York City, of all places. But this was the substance of the trial. It was never argued that he even, or never proven, that he advocated for the killing of American civilians. By no means. He was someone who only advocated and didn't even try to really support, which they tried to argue, I suppose, that he actually tried to support people in resisting said occupation. He didn't try to travel to these occupied lands and help resist. It was just his beliefs. ACLU called it a thought crime that he was convicted of. A professor at Yale University, I think it was Andrew March, wrote a great article actually talking about his translation work and the primary role that his translation work played in the case as evidence against him. He said that what Tariq Mahan is in prison for is what I do for a living. He said the only difference is that the prosecutor thought that he could prove what was in his mind, what his intentions were. That his intentions, my intentions are apparently academic, whereas his intentions must have been to motivate people to actually attack, and so therefore, and this is a thought crime, something that has no place in court. This is one of those cases that it reverberates in American Muslim communities, at least, and I'm sure around the world. This is one of those cases that it has a very clear chilling effect. And I was proud of the ACLU for taking a case like this on. It's not a popular one to take some of these so-called terrorism cases, because this is absolutely an issue of free speech, the free practice of religion, and very basic things which allow a much wider swath of people to now be sucked into prisons. A final case, and I hope I'm not missing major details. If I think of it later, we'll get to it. But the final case, and I appreciate what both Dermot and Nadia said about the importance of highlighting our sisters in this struggle. And it was actually discussed beforehand about, I think we did discuss this, didn't we, Nadia, about changing the title of the event, actually to make sure to be more inclusive of our better gender, yeah, our female leaders as well. But the alliteration was absolutely important.
Marketing trumps for social media.
And so this last case, though, is very crucial. And I'll put it this way. This case was reading about this case. I remember, I believe I was in high school when it first started. I was young in college. And I remember when my mother read about this case, it was one of the first times I saw her cry about something which we would consider, political in nature. Like it was something that affected her so deeply, and that affected me, of course. And I was familiar with the case, and I knew how ugly it was, but the ability of this case to speak to a group of people who weren't necessarily actively politicized perhaps and aware, but not actively working on these issues, said something to me, and it was something that I dug in further and ended up later on in my work, reaching out to the campaign and reaching out to the family, and I had the opportunity to work with them. This is the case of Dr. Afia Siddiqui. Dr. Afia, and I've mentioned her name in the last two nights, but this case is one that requires looking into the details. This is one of those cases, and I use this last, even though it's the chronological order with Tariq Mahan is flipped. because this is one of those cases which I really believe the government prosecuted only because they could, to prove a point. The accusation was, actually let me start with our accusations because I think that's even more important. The crimes committed against her are much more serious than anything she's even been accused of.
Yeah.
And in 2003, she was in Pakistan and disappeared. The government claimed that someone named her as some courier for terror, something like this, and she disappeared. No record of where she's held. 5 years later, sorry? And 3 children. That's right, exactly. 2 children, only 2 of the children were returned. But the 3rd child that she had, which disappeared, is still not found. And one of the children turned up years later at his sister's house, I believe, speaking American accented English. And she pops up now 5 years later in Afghanistan in a daze, apparently, like stunned, visibly out of place, just really out of it. And she's arrested, she doesn't even make it a block. And she's arrested by American soldiers, or by the American occupation force, with some backpack, and they say that in this backpack there's some plans for a bomb, and chemical containers and this and that, and a map of New York, something like this. Let's tie it all together, right? Nice neat little package. And in her, as she's being held now in Afghanistan by the American military police, the story goes, now this is the American government story, is that she was chained up. And somehow she gets a hold of a rifle, like one of the Americans' rifles, and somehow shoots at these soldiers, misses all of them, obviously.
Is this the case?
And then in self-defense, the Americans one of them shoot her in the torso, I believe it was. She was injured. And on this charge of attempted murder of these American occupation troops, essentially, she is flown back to New York and tried in this great big show trial. I think it was the New York Post had this big headline on the front, Lady Al Qaeda. I mean, that's not how you say Al Qaeda, but it sounds better if you have the rhyme, an internal rhyme. This big show trial, and finally she's convicted. She denies all charges, of course, and she's convicted, finally sentenced to 86 years.
Attempted murder.
For attempted murder. When she was the only one harmed, in this case, and literally it seems so physically impossible for even this to occur. Yeah.
It's also worse because the bomb plans that they
Yeah.
have in the background and all that, they never caught any charges based on any of that.
That's a good point, actually. I didn't even think about that. You heard that? These plans, these alleged plans for the bomb, and there have been other people who have been convicted, who have been charged and convicted on cases less than this, with much less information than an actual bomb plan and this and that, and so-called chemicals, whatever it was. And absolutely right, Carrie's right, that they never charged her, with any such crime, which makes the whole thing, of course, look that much more suspicious. After the fact, there are reports that there are other prisoners held in American black sites in Afghanistan that put her in other prisons. In Bagram Air Base, I think, was the one that that people thought that she was there. Please, yeah, absolutely. I can translate for you.
Yeah, the case I was talking about, Mazin Rooney himself, people identified that woman as that's where we found out about her. She was recording his
Right. I didn't realize that was Muslim.
He was the one who first found her, and when we didn't put it was her.
The brother was mentioning the case of Mazin Beg and the lady in the cell.
The lady screaming,
Oh,
who
the
thought it
lady
was his
screaming.
wife, yes.
And this was, it's suspected that this was Dr. Afia Siddiqui. That she was tortured, that she was raped, by Americans while in their detention in these black sites, in the military base there.
That was in 5 years that she was.
Disappeared, right, that she was exactly unconstitutional. I didn't actually know that connection. That's disgusting. I think the case explains itself. And I like to reiterate that this case stands as one of, not just a shame, of course, on the American government and the whole last 20 years, and you could argue the whole settler colonial history of America is a big shame on the institution itself. But it's also, and I'll say many American Muslim leaders feel the same, that this is a shame on us, that we've been unable really to rally mass movement to free her. And such is the level of, it's not even apathy. I don't want to, I can't say that, I can't say it's apathy. But such is the level of fear, such is the level of internalized Islamophobia and bigotry that many Muslims in America have, that we've been unable really to organize, to put serious pressure on the American government to free her. Once in a while, pressure comes from Pakistan. Once in a while, a group overseas will kidnap a soldier. Not kidnap, that's not fair, because the soldiers aren't on their own land. They arrest them. They arrest American soldiers. Let me not buy into this nonsense either. They'll arrest an American soldier someplace and try to trade them for a group, including Mafia, and it's just always falling through. And I say that, and I include that, I'm not here in America, that I want to share that to caution all of us, understanding that a generational link is needed. And this is true for the Islamic struggle, and this is true, I understand, from our hosts. This is needed in the Irish struggle as well. That we need to make sure that we are, for the youth here, that we are educating ourselves and others and connecting with these struggles and making ourselves part of it, making ourselves useful in it. And for my esteemed elders here as well, that we are doing that. That we are doing that work, and that we're making those connections, that we're organizing. Because these people, these are lives, these are families. And the oppression, as Dermot was saying, it's bad enough that they're in prison innocent. But what they do to them when they're in is almost even more shocking than the imprisonment itself. The conditions that we hear about in the prison that Dr. Afi is in Texas, FMC Carswell, I think it's called, it's shocking. Like in the last decade, I think about 100 women have just mysteriously died. Just
suicide rates.
And they say it's suicide, yeah.
The suicide rates, confirmed suicide rates are 10 times higher than any other prison in America.
Right. And the theory is from her campaign that basically they're just trying to get her to kill herself. Even the last appeal, she really gave the court a vote of no confidence. Her heart wasn't in it anymore. She didn't recognize the court, the legitimacy of the court to even hear her appeal. Her family members were trying to contact them, trying to send letters and calls, and they weren't hearing anything back, and they were shocked by that because they knew that she would always want to hear from her family. Finally, someone got through to visit, and she said, "No one's called me. No one sent any letters," meaning that even the prison administration itself is keeping her from communication that's coming in her support. All the letter writing campaigns, the postcard campaigns that people have led, trying to get correspondence with her to let her know that people are thinking about her, that people care, that people are ready to stand up to support. They shut this down as well. And this is part of the oppression of the prison system as well. The CMUs, the communication management units, I forget what you guys call them in the UK, but these are basically solitary confinement for everybody. With CMUs in Colorado and in a couple states in the United States that are huge percentages of which are Muslims. Huge percentage of Muslims, 23 and a half hours a day in solitary confinement. That half hour isn't much of a social time either. You're still in a cage where visits are extremely limited, correspondence is extremely limited. You can't really have much of anything. Many of these guys aren't allowed congregational prayers even. That was a battle just to get that for some. Working with the families, we have family conferences in the United States with people where NCPCF is the organization where they gather families of these prisoners together to try to provide support, to provide services to them directly, and to also train them and prepare them to advocate for themselves, to be the leaders of this movement that we need. When they talk about it, apparently the guys inside know because they're all in the same wing. They're all in the same prison, so when they are at least within earshot of each other, they're all talking, they're all happy that their families are finally meeting on the outside, and it's very strange brotherhood that's formed around this, but this is going to be the core, as my colleagues have mentioned, this is going to be the core of the movement moving forward. Anyway, I'll wrap up there. These were 3 cases, and there's so many others. Hundreds, literally hundreds of cases. At last count, that maybe 2 years ago, I guess was the last count, over 500 cases, 500 to 600 cases in the United States alone, which were very clearly political prosecution. And there's plenty of other cases which are the result of mass surveillance and of police harassing people and provoking, but 500 at least plus cases where Muslims in America were either framed or entrapped, essentially. And this continues. It's gotten worse. You know, the Fortix 5, great family, great brothers from New Jersey, who were just framed. Not even an entrapment case, they were just framed. Just an informant came along and put words in their mouths. That's all it was, that's all it took to send 5 men away for life. Young men, you know, with young families. The Newburgh 4, where an informant takes advantage of people really in desperate poverty. And even these guys thought that they were playing the informant. They thought they were going to be able to take his money without actually doing anything that he asked them to do. The guy was telling them that he was, you know, Al-Qaeda or something like this, and they didn't even believe him. They just thought, okay, if he's got cash, then we'll take it and run. But they, of course, they didn't even get that far, and the FBI swoops in and arrests them all before any buttons get pressed, and now they're also looking at 25 years, I think, was the minimum sentence, and they all received at least that. People with mental and emotional disabilities, people like Ahmed Farhani, people like Siraj Mateen, guys who literally an informant was taking them by the hand, convincing them to play even minor roles, you know, in some, not even plots usually. Like Ahmed Farhani, this informant finally, after convincing him to drop out of college, after convincing him to leave his work, and was just giving him money and giving him drugs and alcohol, and finally convinces him to come buy a gun with him. And the guy goes to buy a gun. He thinks he's buying a gun, and the guy says, "Oh, you bought a gun? We have a special deal today. Here, take a grenade for free with that gun." And so now they have him not just on a gun, not just on a handgun, but on an explosives charge. And it's such a joke. The Newburgh case, which I just mentioned, it was way upstate, where they had to find these guys to pull them down. They convinced them to participate in some plot to blow up a synagogue in the Bronx. So that way the New York City Police Department gets some federal funding out of all this too. And the Jewish community also got a lot of good federal funding to protect their synagogues from this growing Islamic threat. I don't know much about that one. But the citizenship is relevant. The brother Abu Amana, who had his citizenship stripped. Huh?
He was tweeting about it.
Oh, okay, I misread. Okay, that case, yeah. My brother literally had his citizenship stripped by the United Kingdom. This is something that France has passed law for this, and this is something that even in the U.S. discussions are starting about how do you take citizenship away from people for certain crimes. Extradited to the U.S. and given now just 9 years. Is that correct? 9 years in prison. It's not light, a light 9 years. You know, these cases, these are tests for us. You know, these are an opportunity for us, of course, to test our ethics and to prove ourselves. We know that the student in this world is a test. But I really hope that we will meet the challenge. I really hope that we can build alliance, that we can organize, connect struggles in all lands and in all places, people of all faiths, that we develop a vision which is based on principles of human rights. That's my hope, that's my pledge. I'm honored to share this space and struggle with you all, and I hope that we will be useful in it. To the people of Ireland, we are at your service, literally, we are at your service. We're here and we'll be here whenever we're needed. The struggle continues and we know it. As Nadia said, none of us are free until all are free. So I end on that. We want to thank you for your time, and I hope that you'll have good questions and comments, and we'll continue this discussion and this struggle all together. Thanks.